Hey, Raising America family. One of the biggest issues that we hear from viewers and listeners is that they're really concerned with what their kids are watching and listening to, whether it be on social media, on their cell phones, or even streaming on Netflix or Disney. So we have two podcast hosts today to tackle the topic: is content too sexualized? We have Brad Polumbo. He's the host of Brad versus Everyone. And we have Bethany Mandel. She's the Mom Wars host, available on podcast and Substack. Here they are. Bethany, I think I'm just going to start with you. You and I were talking before we press record. You are responsible for six human beings. They live with you, you homeschool them, but that also means that maybe there's some times when you need screen time. And I think right now we're all trying to navigate that. We're being told less screen time is better. It's certainly how we were raised. Are you worried about what's available for kids?
I am. So I'll caveat that I was raised on Days of Our Lives, and they were
Mm,
like
a good one.
that was a part of my upbringing. They were family members. Um, but yeah, I mean it's hard to navigate that. The mom guilt is really strong with the screen time stuff. I think the difference between what we grew up on, which was like sort of Gilmore Girls, Dawson's Creek, One Tree Hill, all of those kinds of show, which was very hypersexualized and adultified children very, very young. I think the difference here is there's a very clear agenda that is driven by critical theory that is being subjected on our children a great deal, whether it be books or media, movies, TV shows, and it can be exhausting pre-screening that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
But I think you know we kind of have to also talk to our children and make them aware of these things very young, because it comes to the point, especially as your kids get older, that they can spot these things for themselves. And it's always a struggle. It's always a juggle trying to figure out what do I want my kids to watch, what's appropriate, while also just wanting them to go and sit in another room so you can make dinner for 20 minutes.
Well, yeah, a little bit of break. And now, obviously, Brad, my first question is I really need to know if you're a Days of Our Lives fan. Like, that's going to be my question out of the gate.
No, but I
He's too
did
young.
love One Tree Hill back in the day, so that's a amazing
wait,
shout out.
wait, Bethany, does that age us a little bit, though? Brad, are you trying? I mean, are you saying that we're a little bit too old here?
No, no, I'm saying,
No,
that
he
I'm
was
too
too young
young.
to be watching One Tree Hill.
Well, that's true. I mean, it was kind of, it was like reruns on the CW.
Okay. Okay. But I will admit, so Bethany, I agree with you. I mean, when I think of Days of Our Lives, actually, it was a little bit spicy. So, I mean, Brad, I want to bring you in the conversation because do you really, are we making a bigger deal of it than it should be? Or is it a big deal?
I mean, yes and no. I mean, I always put in the context of you see some of these debates between concerned parents, and I understand their concerns, of course, about like what's in your kid's school library, because there's some like crazy out there books that have been put in kids' libraries. But at the same time, the statistics on when kids first see pornography on their phones, like serious pornography, are shocking and startling. And there's this wealth of stuff online and at their fingertips and on social media. I mean, they're seeing people die on video. They're seeing boys are seeing hardcore pornography when they're 10 years old, but then you have city council meetings or school board meetings erupting over what books in a library. I'm not saying it doesn't matter. I'm just saying sometimes I do think you can lose the forest for the trees a little bit, to the extent that how many kids are even reading books? Unfortunately, not nearly as many as was when I was a kid or when you guys were kids. So I think I agree with what Bethany said that at some point you just have to prepare your child for the world as it exists, which I'm sure is much easier said than done. But they are going to encounter a lot of this stuff. And yeah, on a platform like Netflix, for example,
Mhm.
they have hundreds of millions of subscribers and they have to have content that appeals to a very wide array. Now, some of it I really do object to and I do consider to be propaganda or what have you, but there's also lots of
What are you referring to? Like, what do you think?
Well, so there's a couple shows in particular that one of them featured like a non-binary bison explaining they
I
don't
think I
feel like
saw.
male nor female. You have Dead End Paranormal Park that was on Netflix. There was a spin-off of Transformers, I believe, that has non-binary robot and these kinds of things that frankly I don't even as an adult think make any sense. I think they're not real. And so the idea that you're going to be introducing young children through beloved characters to the idea that some of us aren't male or female because we don't feel like girly girls or boys, I think that's a confusing and age inappropriate and frankly just incoherent message to be telling kids. But so I think the answer there more than anything is to just try to pre-screen what your kids are watching though, because I don't love the idea of some people object to this show, so we've got to get it removed from the platform, or everyone has to cancel Netflix. I understand why some people would, but they have to meet a market that's like 100 million people with diverse tastes and interests. And there's a lot of stuff on there that right-leaning Americans might like that liberals or progressives all across the country strongly object to. I remember when they tried to get Dave Chappelle's Netflix special removed because he made jokes about trans people. I defended it at the time. I think at some point you have to accept there's going to be a wide array of content and hopefully just monitor and have parental controls.
I was actually looking at the movement and some and how their stock's doing because I as a parent have been watching the cancel Netflix movement as well. And I think Bethany, you may agree or disagree. I feel a little bit torn because, like you said, and as Brad alluded to, there's certainly entertaining uh, material on Netflix, but there's some material that I don't find appealing. So. Do I cancel it just because there are shows on there that I don't like or that I don't want my kids to watch?
So I agree with Brad. I think that the happy medium here is parents need information. It would be really nice if Netflix would disclose the themes of these shows and be really honest and say there's some themes in here that would be morally objectionable to religious parents. Having that heads up would be really nice. One of the ways that I screen books is I go and I look at the one-star reviews on Amazon, and usually this kind of stuff pops up. It's much I'm not interested in pre-screening a cartoon about a bison. Not interested in
Right.
doing that. I'm not interested in pre-screening all of the episodes of PJ Masks before my kids watch it. I would love if entertainment companies would just put their cards on the table and say, these are the priors that we came here with. And if they are your cup of tea, and they are the cup of tea of parents, there are parents who want their kids to watch a cartoon about a non-binary bison. And so putting those cards on the table to say, this will appeal to you if you want your kids to learn about non-binary bisons, that will bring those parents to the yard. And then I don't have to pre-screen this stuff. I don't think that's a big ask. And I would love if companies would start just putting their cards on the table.
But you wouldn't cancel Netflix just because there were things on there that you didn't like, or would you? Or did you?
No, I'm in the middle of Gilmore Girls. I
Right.
can't cancel Netflix right now.
No, I can't either. There's things on there that I need.
What am I gonna do?
Uh, but to me, I sometimes I feel like it's just overwhelming as a parent. Like I because there's enough
Mhm.
to deal with every single day, like Brad alluded to. I mean, I see what my kids bring home from the library because I sometimes am a little bit surprised, and that's fine, because But at some point, I think to myself, "Well, at least they're reading, right? We'll focus on literacy at this point. We'll get to the message later." But as a parent, I think I just want them to have a 20-minute episode of PJ Masks where they're saving the day. And I really don't want the underlying messages. Where the underlying messages come from? Does that when we talk about some of these shows like the Bison,
Yeah.
where is this coming from?
I mean, so I love the PJ Masks reference, first of all. They do save the day, and I love that theme of that show. Um, I will disagree with you a little bit on at least they're reading, because we don't say that about food. We don't say at least they're eating when they're eating nothing but candy on November 1st. So we do have to make sure that they're ingesting, whether it be intellectually or physically, good quality things. Obviously, there will also be junk that slips in there. I did a weird deep dive into that Netflix show with
Right.
the non-binary bison,
Yeah, that's
and
why I was
the
asking you.
producers and the yeah, the
Right.
producers and the writers don't have children. They have an agenda they have set out to be cartoonists and to be children's entertainment producers without children. And I think that's weird and sus. Just like I think it's weird and sus when people decide to run for school board when they don't have children. Why? What are you doing? What is your interest here? So I think that there's a very clear ideological agenda for these people. And again, put your cards on the table. Just say that. But that, I mean, that was their intention. They decided that they wanted to slip this into whatever they were producing, and they figured out ways to pigeonhole those messages into what they were
You
producing.
know, Brad, I'm curious to hear your reaction to that because, well, first of all, I hear you. At the same time, you know, people maybe they need a job, right? Maybe they're in the entertainment industry and they need a job, and this is a show, and they said, okay, well, I fit the criteria, so I'm going to go ahead and take this role.
Yeah, I think any given person might have benevolent intentions entering this line of work, but I think what's undeniable is that there's been a very concentrated push in the name of diversity, equity, and inclusion. They've brought in like DEI czars at Netflix and at other
Yeah.
entertainment companies, specifically tasked with promoting different ideological and controversial messages. They have entire programs and initiatives focused around increasing the number of black queer stories in media, in Netflix or what have you, or whatever different identity boxes. They haven't been shy about that. And if you take a look kind of under the hood in higher education or academia, I mean, you'll find very explicit, they're not shy about the fact that they do view media and culture and shows and writing as a way to spread values and spread a message, which, to be fair, it is and always has been. But children's shows are typically supposed to focus on messages that are, fairly uncontroversial. Sharing is caring, right? Like, don't hurt people, don't take their stuff, not necessarily thorny issues that most of society still rejects or disagrees with, like the idea of anybody being non-binary at all. So I think that's the problem there. Then I also think some of this comes just from the disconnect between the people making the stuff and the people consuming the stuff. We see this especially in newspapers and in media, which is where I started my career, right? Is the traditional mainstream media is staffed by people who don't own guns, don't go to church, aren't pro-life, and half the time don't know anybody who is. But they're covering a country where huge swaths of the country are all of those things and more, and it's really important and profound to them. Well, the people designing children's content, for the most part, are the type of people who it's not that crazy to them to have a non-binary friend or to have these different topics. They know multiple trans people, and they probably barely talk to or know anybody where that's even a controversial aspect of reality or of life. So then they don't understand that most of America is not like that, or not totally in keeping with that. I think
Yeah,
there's
but
a
money
real
talks,
disconnect.
right, Brad? I mean, didn't they take it? Netflix took a hit. Disney's taken a hit. I mean, I feel like that's kind of going away. I feel like the DEI backlash is in full force. Am I wrong?
Well, I think it's in full force politically. So I think you
Okay.
see, for example, the Trump administration going to war against DEI, and I certainly support some of what they've done on that front. But in terms of mass market responses to this kind of thing, I'm actually kind of skeptical. Like, yes, Netflix's stock dipped, but if you zoom out, it did recover. And if you look at their numbers of subscribers in the next quarter and the quarter after this, I'm not really sure you'll see a huge dip. I think a lot of people get very ginned up about this kind of stuff online, and they see the libs of TikTok tweet, or they see a Fox News segment about it and they're like, "Oh, that's awful." But that actually translating to people canceling their Netflix subscriptions, I think, is a vanishingly small percentage of actual consumers. I don't think people do that when it comes to services and products that they actually otherwise still rely on and like a lot.
You know, Brad, you brought up a really good point, and you mentioned, are we really focusing on the right, I guess, the right topics? Because it's broader than that. We talk about social media. You mentioned some of the things that kids are going to see when they're really young. I had that in my household. My 10-year-old saw a video at a friend's house right after Charlie Kirk, and in fact saw everything long before I did. Bethany, I want to bring you into the conversation because we can focus in on Disney, we can focus in on Netflix, but it really is just the fact that it's us against really technologies that we didn't have growing up. Having One Tree Hill on the CW just seems like apples to oranges when my daughter, who doesn't have access to TikTok, can go to a friend's house where she's safe but does have access to TikTok, and then she sees things that I don't even see.
One of my biggest frustrations in the parenting discourse is that people aren't able or willing to make rational risk assessments. And what Brad discussed is exactly this, that there's so much attention and effort placed on, and I applaud it. Like, we should be screening what our kids are watching and reading, all of those things. But the much, much bigger threat to our children's innocence and sanity, everything, is their access to phones. We cannot let them have unfiltered access to the internet. We have to make sure that we're looking at their internet histories if they're working on school stuff. Um, it is the biggest risk because Brad is correct. The first opportunity that children have statistically to see porn is at 10 years old. Seeing violent stuff, all of those things rewire your brain in a way that you can't put that genie back in the bottle. It's a Pandora's box that you open, and we're seeing the ramifications of this pornification of children in all the groypers now. All of these, like Nick Fuentes's in their early 20s, late teens. This is the result of giving children unfiltered access to the worst of the internet. I hope that people, take from this segment, yeah, sure, look at what your kids are reading, look at what your kids are watching, but much, much, much more importantly, do not give your children a smartphone until they're late teens, if not later.
Mhm.
Make them
Yeah.
buy their own smartphone, honestly. Don't give them access to the internet that is unfiltered and unsupervised,
Mhm.
because that is the much bigger risk here.
Brad, when you go out and talk to people, do you feel like the pendulum? And I'm hoping that it's swinging because my kids are younger, and I'm selfish, a little bit of a narcissist. So I'm glad that my kids are younger as opposed to maybe late teens right now. Is that there was this really test dummy generation that is saying, wait, hold on, even we wish we had some guardrails that were in place.
Yeah, I hope so. And I would just agree with Bethany and add on that, like, if you're upset about the non-binary bison on the Netflix show, but your kids have access to TikTok and
Right.
scroll multiple hours per day, which I think probably describes thousands, if not millions, of people
Yep.
who saw this news story, then you're just totally missing the forest for the trees because they are. I cover TikTok, I cover social media, and I mean, they're being inculcated with ideology and propaganda about these kinds of issues, about different identities and fads and social phenomenons, and come with me on my pronoun journey and all this kind of stuff on that app and elsewhere on the internet all the time in a much more explicit and probably much more compelling way. I mean, than any Netflix show or cartoon, because these people develop parasocial relationships with influencers and then follow them and then develop almost a personal connection to this
Mhm.
person. And then this person starts telling them that they're changing their pronouns and that I'm non-binary now. I think that's going to be much more compelling to a 13-year-old than something they saw on Netflix, or even when they were younger watching a cartoon. But you asked about whether there's this generational change,
Yeah.
and I think in theory, a lot of people who are maybe my age or a little younger, we realize that this is not good for us growing up with screens. Now, I had my true childhood without it, but by the time I was 12, I had access to all of this stuff that we're talking about and more. And I do see with some of my peers who are starting to have kids, they're like very dedicated to avoiding screen time and to limiting and controlling the stuff. But I do question how representative that is. I mean,
Mhm.
my peer group is a little different than just the national average. And frankly, it's not always easy. I'm not going to say it's not an option for people because it's always just a question of priorities and choices and sacrifice. But when you're under financial stress and you're working all these jobs, it's like I find it hard, especially as somebody who doesn't have kids, at least not yet, to judge too harshly the people who do give their kid the iPad at the
Right.
restaurant, or to who do let their kid access TikTok. I mean, I think they shouldn't, and I hope that people will change or find a kind of moderated perspective on this. But do I think that's happening at scale? I don't know.
Yeah, I always tread lightly a little bit on that one too. I think as a parent, I'm sort of, and maybe it's because I'm busy and I can't. I'm just wondering where this is coming from. In your research, Brad, when you talk about all these folks on social media, I mean, is it foreign actors? Like, who has the time and is thinking to themselves, like, I want to spread an agenda? I mean, I'm just trying to make sure that we're checking all like basic hygiene boxes every single day, and that, like Bethany said, if that we're reading, and I want to get through the day every day to the best of my ability. And so for me, it's so hard to comprehend that there are bad actors out there, but there are, right? Brad, you probably see this every day.
Yeah, I'm pretty skeptical of the idea that it's like primarily driven by foreign actors or Russian
You are.
bots, right? Obviously, that is a thing, but I
Okay.
actually think the broader problem is that social media platforms very quickly become echo chambers where just the most extreme people participate and then bounce off of each other and become more extreme. They have pretty toxic incentive structures as well. The desire to stand out or get noticed for revenue or monetization is always requiring you to, if you're just do what everyone else does, well, then you're not going to stand out, right? You have to take it to a new level. You have to say something even more edgy or controversial or extreme. And then, especially among a kind of educated, uh, liberal leaning cohort of parents, I think a lot of people, and maybe this was done with good intentions, I'd grant, but we're grown to view oppression or victimhood or these different things as a form of currency, and so then they go out there and they see different personalities or identity boxes they're able to adopt and start checking off, and their peer groups do it, and obviously there's an aspect of social contagion to some of this stuff because young people and teenagers are mentally and emotionally and psychologically impressionable and very subject to peer influence on everything. So I think the combination of a platform like TikTok, at least initially, it changed a little bit, but at least initially being dominated by highly left-leaning creators and audiences and viewers bouncing off of each other and constantly one-upping each other, it leads to an atmosphere where even if people aren't intentionally there, I don't think there's some big plot. I don't think they're getting together and saying, how can we convince more kids to be non-binary today? I mean, maybe you could find some, right? But I don't think that's most people. It's just the impact of what they are doing to outdo each other and optimize for the algorithm and build a niche and a brand for themselves that they can monetize. And that's just more the effect of it than it is the result of some sinister conspiracy, at least in large part, I think.
Well, okay, so Bethany, you've got 6 children, if I'm not mistaken, and you said your oldest one was 12, right? 12 and 10?
Yep.
Your 2 oldest? Okay, so you have time before, because you said you were gonna introduce technology a little bit later, in the teen years. What's your game plan? Because you're in the thick of it. You're in the thick of the preteen era, where I know your 12-year-old, like my almost 12-year-old, has friends who already have cell phones, and they already have the Snapchat profiles and the Instagram profiles. So how are you navigating this next step?
So she has a computer and she just got an iPad. Like I'll be like very specific of just what we're doing in our house.
Right.
So she just got an iPad so she can use iMessage with people who have cell phones. And so she communicates with people that way. She has an email, she emails with people. We are planning on getting her a flip phone in the next year or so when she starts babysitting and needs to be able to text, from their house. Um, Perhaps maybe she'll just bring her iPad and get onto their Wi-Fi. We'll see. But I'm not planning on getting her a cell phone. I'm just going to have her pay for whatever she wants to buy, and that will be a limiting factor because an iPhone is $1,200, and so if she is able to make
Right.
$1,200, then she's ready for it. I think that that's going to be a limiting sort of situation for her, and she's probably not going to be able to afford that until she's in her late teens. And I also
Right.
don't want to buy it. I buy my own.
Right. No, and that's what my daughter said. I want an Apple Watch for my birthday. And I said, yes, someday when I have an Apple Watch, maybe you'll have an Apple Watch. But I actually am trying to avoid connectivity as much as possible as a 41-year-old woman. So I'm not sure why you want it as an 11-year-old. Well, you've been hosting this podcast, the Mom Wars podcast, do you hear this a lot from parents? That children are being exposed to more sexualized content than they would like.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the difference I think is, when we were kids, we're basically the same age. When we were kids, people had to like you had to go to a video store and you had to rent these things. You had to look under your friend's brother's bed for a Playboy. That doesn't exist anymore. Anyone who has access to a phone or access to the internet has access to the most horrible content imaginable. And so, another tip that I have for parents is make sure that you're on the same page with your kids' friends and have them choose wisely. You can nix friends. And so if your kid is friends with someone who is not responsible and that you don't think that they're, going to be able to screen the content at their house, don't let them go to their house. One of my biggest frustrations with parenting, in addition to the lack of rational risk assessment, people are afraid to assert themselves as parents and as authority figures, and they need to start saying, I'm sorry, I'm in charge, you're the child here, and what I say goes. No, I've never heard someone say in the wild because I said so anymore. um
Well, why is that? Why, I mean, first of all, obviously your dog's heated too, but why is that, like a is that a trend, or why are we afraid what other people are gonna think?
Yeah, I mean, it's the gentle parenting. People are afraid of upsetting their children and making their children upset. And it goes back to the toddler years. People, instead of telling your child, put your shoes on because I said so, it's, well, I understand you have big feelings. And like, enough, stop. Tell the child to put their shoes on because you said so. And it turns into instead a 45-minute debate. And that from the toddler years, in the teen years, you still can't assert your authority because you never practiced when they were 2 and you had a physical domination over them.
I mean, the gentle Brad, I thought that was going away. Are we still gentle parenting?
Some people definitely still are. I
They
mean,
are?
I think, yeah, you go
How
on
did I get
TikTok, you'll see,
anything?
come
Really?
with me as a non-binary parent to gentle parent my two kids. I mean, and I'm not even making that up. That's a real person who posted a video just like that. It's definitely still a thing. Hopefully it's fading and there's some criticism, but I guess, maybe this makes me grateful I'm not a parent yet. It's a little bit pessimism inducing to think about what can actually be done, because even stuff that I think sounds great on paper. So I live in Florida and they have a age verification law for pornography. So if you try to go to a pornographic website, it will ask you to verify your identity and like your age. And then they say they're not storing that information, but you do have to show something. You can evade that with about 10 seconds of
Mhm.
switching over to a VPN app, resetting your location to New York or Ontario, whatever, and then hitting refresh, and boom, you're around that. So I worry, and I don't have the answers here. That's better than nothing, I guess, and might prevent some people. But I mean, young people are so technologically savvy. I think they'll be one step ahead on some of this stuff. So while I certainly don't think you should gentle parent them, it might be worth talking to your kids to try to get them to understand why they shouldn't be looking at this kind of thing, and not just
Yeah.
have it be a mandate that you're forcing down upon them. Though obviously, I agree you should exert your authority as a parent, because to some extent it will be very hard to keep your kid sheltered if they're actively trying to still seek this stuff out, or their friends are. Maybe it's possible, I don't know, but it
Yeah.
seems like a daunting task in 2025.
You know what,
Yeah.
Bethany, what's the
Um,
biggest liability to this gentle parenting? Go ahead, what were you gonna say?
Yeah, I want to say also it's not fading because all the experts are still gentle parenting. And so the way that we hear people talk about what good feelings Becky, is that her name? The like one of the top, she's like the parenting influencer of our kids generation.
Yeah.
Miss Rachel is another one. All of these experts, the way that they frame how to properly parent is through that lens of gentle parenting. And so our generation doesn't hear a lot of messages about how to parent in a way that is more authoritative, that isn't framing the children's feelings as the number one goal and the number one thing that needs to be honored in a house. And so that's a frustration that I've had, that all of these experts in the mental health world and sort of in the chattering class of influencers all look through the gentle framework. And it changes the way that we parent as a result.
Just think it's like one of the biggest liabilities because it's just not, it doesn't necessarily simulate what the kids are going to be exposed to in the real world, and I think that's probably one of my biggest fears as a parent for these kids as they get out into the real world and there's just nothing gentle about it. So how do you get that message across, Brad? How do you say, wait a second, we're on the wrong track, can we bring it back?
Well, I think you probably need a rise of alternative perspectives. So there are definitely some people like Bethany are putting themselves out there, but maybe more people need to be not so gentle parenting influencers, right? And model a different way because I mean, we would like to think that people will do look into the research and see that this doesn't work, or they'll read books about it. But frankly, a lot of people won't. They will continue to look to TikTok or YouTube or Instagram influencers. So, I mean, if you want to get an alternative message out there, I think to some extent you have to build your own ecosystem of voices and
Mhm.
perspectives. And I don't know. I'm not as plugged in, not having kids, to the world of parenting influencing. But I think you will need an alternative to Miss Rachel
Yeah.
and to these other mega mainstream voices that other people can turn to offer them something different.
Okay, well, Bethany, I think my last question, especially, I can hear the little ones that are saying, "Wait a second, it's time to get back to us," and we want to ask you a little bit, before I let you go, looking forward, right? I think there are more voices like you. Are you optimistic that people are avoiding the cell phones, putting them down, restricting kids' uses on social media, and maybe turning off some of the things that could be really highly sexualized or influential?
You broke up a little bit there.
So I think I wanted to sort of leave on a positive note because I thought a little bit of a doom and gloom there is I wanted to end on looking forward. I mean, you've been hosting the show, and are you optimistic about the future? I mean, you've got 6 kids, and I know Brad doesn't have kids yet, but the future's coming to him fast, right? So, with our kids being exposed to all of this, do you think that we're dialing it back? Do you feel optimistic?
I mean, I think having children is an expression of optimism, and so perhaps having 6 children is an extreme expression of optimism. But we have to actively, have to actively parent, and I think that what Brad said before about the fact that a lot of people might not necessarily be aware of the framework through which people are speaking and giving advice. I think that the more that folks are curating their ecosystem very carefully, one of my best piece of advice I heard when I was a young parent was don't talk to just anyone or listen to anyone. Talk to parents of children that you want your kids to be like. And so, identify mentors either on the internet or in real life or both who have older children that you want your kids to turn out like, and then ask them their advice and see what they're doing. And that's how I have tried to frame the mom wars, both on the Substack and on the podcast, is, giving that sort of honest window into I'm not perfect, but this is what's working for us. And my kids are really nice. They're brutalizing each other in the basement currently, but generally speaking, they're very
Right.
nice. But I think that we have to just be more mindful of what our kids are consuming, but also what we as parents are consuming, and making sure that we're ingesting everything that we should be as parents, so that we're able to make rational risk assessments, so that we're able to see the forest through the trees and say, I'm not going to give my kid a cell phone until they're 15, 16 years old. But like, is it the worst thing in the world if they watch a non-binary show on Netflix about a bison? Whatever. Okay, fine. And maybe that's a teachable moment. But I think that people just have to more actively be parenting.
All right, Brad, before I let you go, where can people find you? And obviously you're putting yourself out there a lot right now. So let's hear it.
Yeah, check out the Brad versus Everyone podcast, where I cover social media and internet insanity from an independent perspective on Apple, iHeart, Spotify, or on YouTube.
All right, you both are so I'm so grateful for your time. You were wonderful. Thank you guys. It's a conversation that's continuing, so I'm certain that we'll probably ask you guys back. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.